Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to UncommonCents number 38. It's Craig Kouimanis and Dean Holmes here with you again for another exciting episode. And don't you just love a special guest? And, we've been on the hunt for a little while now. It's just been me and Dean, and we feel, well, maybe we're boring everyone. Let's find someone to bring some excitement to the group. And ladies and gentlemen, we're very lucky to have Tim Lane, who's a partner with Accru, joining us this afternoon. If there was a marketing sign, it would have Tim Lane since 1999, because that is as long as he's been working with financial planning practices on succession and valuation and all of that type of thing. So we're going to unpack all of that today. So welcome, Tim, but I'm going to throw over to Dean to kick us off today. How are you, Dean?
G'day, Craig. Very good, thank you. Thanks to all of our listeners as well that are listening in live. So if you do have any questions or comments, you can use the chat box in LinkedIn to let us know that you have a question, and we'll look to answer that live. Obviously, you can find us afterwards if you don't get to ask any questions. So, Tim, the biggest question that every advisor wants to know is what their business is worth in the open market. And so tell us a little bit about what your role is that you do at the moment in terms of valuations. And then let all the advisors know the $1 million figure for their practice.
Yeah, so we do a lot of work. The key things we do is we do valuation work, we do succession work, we do business sales, and sort of other related projects around that, bringing shareholders in, bringing shareholders out. You've asked a very difficult question in a very short amount of time there, Dean. To sort of in a nutshell, a financial planning practice is either sold as a client base, so it's sold as a group of clients with nothing else, or it's sold as a business or a part of a business, a piece of equity of that business. So what we see with client-based sales is they tend to be in the 2.5 to 3 range, but it's very, very clear now that any transaction will be based at the client level. So you'll apply different multiples to different clients. And so when people are quoting multiples now, it's like a homogenized multiple based on re-rating a client base. So that's if you sell a client base. And then if you're selling a business as an entire, that tends to be something probably over 2 million because you need all the stuff to come with it.
Yep.
That will predominantly be sold on a multiple of EBIT, which will be 5 to 6, maybe above 6 in certain circumstances, but it'll be based around its profitability. It's important to understand that the two numbers actually converge roughly around 1.6 million anyway. So there's no, a lot of advisors ring me up and say, like, what do I do? Is it RR or is it EBIT? I said, it sort of doesn't matter. If you run the practice well, those numbers will eventually converge, and probably to a degree the EBIT multiple will exceed that.
Correct. And that's if you're hitting something like a 35% EBIT at the end of the day, that those numbers start to be the same thing, 3 times recurring revenue.
Well, they actually invert. I mean, it's an interesting thing to discuss, but really, if you just think purely about the mathematics, you've got something growing at 3 times or something growing at 6 times. So one's got to mathematically get bigger than the other some stage. So that's just the way that, and again, it depends on the margin you throw that extra profit to the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an interesting point that you raise, like, for us to think about in terms of selling a client base versus a business, because when you sell a client base, your brand, for an example, or your great business processes don't really matter, because you're selling it to another business that is most likely going to put it into their brand and their processes.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So when we talk to people about, initially, we actually try to work out what is the likely transaction you're going to do. Am I going to sell a client base or am I going to sell a business? Now, if you're going to sell a client base, what we say to them is we've got to get it looking this way. It's got to be able to be integrated into someone else's business. It's got to have a good pricing strategy that can go into someone else's business. That's a different equation to, like, if I'm going to sell my whole business on its profitability, there's other things you would need to do there. Not dissimilar, but it's just slightly nuanced in that world.
Yeah, maybe the extent, so just continuing on with that theme of, selling a client base, selling a business, but then as we're reading in the press and stuff, Tim, lots of stuff's going on now about then other parties investing into the business. So it's not really for sale, but I'm bringing in a partner of a larger scale to invest in my business.
Yeah.
How does that change things when firms are looking at what they've got?
Well, we all know who those culprits are. Well, look, they're what you call strategic investors, and they will actually, they're not going to give you generally a multiple of any recurring revenue. They're going to give you, they want a return on investment, and it looks like X. Is the question? What's the question about that, though, Craig? Is it a good idea? Is it a
Well, it's probably not a good idea, but then I guess the extension of it is like lots of people say, but my business isn't for sale today. So I haven't prepped it for sale. So I haven't stripped the guts out of it, if you like, to get a big EBIT number. And so if I was going to do that it would look like this. And they're trying to sort of convince investors that maybe, you need to pay me on a different EBIT, or because that's not the true EBIT. Like, how do you normalize? What do you do? And that type of stuff.
Yeah. So the reality of valuation and sale is it's done on what we call a normalised EBIT. Now, I actually predicted this a couple of years ago in Professional Planner. What the effect of the Royal Commission has been really quite interesting, because what it's done is it's cleaned up the practice normalisation, generally speaking. There's no rebates, there's no grandfathered. You've got pure revenue streams, and you tend not to have large amount of private stuff going through. It doesn't mean you have none. So what we've seen over the journey is that we're less and less doing lots of normalisations in the valuation space and in the sales space, because mostly the numbers are pretty pure now. But the reality is people will value your practice and they will buy your practice on its normalised EBIT. What we've got to be careful of is this word EBIT is a bit misleading in the sense that EBIT is what it is. It's earnings before interest and tax. What a valuation is actually based on is future maintainable earnings. So the EBIT is the proxy for future maintainable earnings. So what it's saying is when my other mate buys my practice, he's not going to pay for my car. So that comes out and becomes, the additional profit is part of future maintainable earnings. That's what the concept is. People get a bit wound up in EBIT, and you do normalise, but it's actually a future maintainable earnings. What I'm buying is the future profitability, not the past.
Yes, that's actually a really good point. I think everyone listening should note that down.
And can you, in that same way, Tim, can you explain why the interest bit is backed out? Just because everyone throws around the term EBIT, but I'm not really sure that everyone can explain why interest out of anything else is backed out of the equation.
Yeah, so interest, so a valuation is supposed to be done exclusive of the structure it's in. So if the structure has debt, do we lose, Dean? Do we?
We might have lost, Dean. Just keep going, mate.
So the valuation is unrelated to the structure it's in. So you separate the structure from the valuation, and then so the interest doesn't affect the valuation, but actually the debt does. So here's my headline valuation less my debt. That's my net. And then what you'll actually find is that it's in a perverse way, it's actually gets a higher return because of the debt, because it's geared.
Yes,
but it's supposed to say this is what it's worth, less the debt. And so if you have interest is not an operating cost; it's a financing cost. So that's why they do it that way. Yeah.
So you're kind of backing out both. You back out the interest, and then you're working out like the NTA of the entity anyway, the value of the asset minus the actual liabilities that you might have in the company anyway.
So you've got to be a bit careful. So what tends to happen in a transaction world is that it's bought out of the entity, so you don't actually buy the entity. So that because this is the other thing people don't understand, which is a really interesting thing to get to prepare yourself for this world. Am I going to sell my entity, or am I going to sell my business or my client base? And they're actually quite different transactions. One has an NTA aspect to it, which you're talking about, and one doesn't. And so a couple of key issues in that are, one, when you do a goodwill or a goodwill valuation, it's actually inclusive of the assets required to run it. So the working capital component is included in that. It's not on top of. The only thing that's on top of is what we call surplus cash. Now, the surplus cash you mainly see in financial planning practices is, I've left all this money in my company because I don't want to pay tax to get it out. Happy days, happy with that. But we will sometimes in a transaction add that to the price because, rather than pull it out as a dividend and pay a lot of tax on it, we'll give it as a capital sum with none on it, which sort of makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that's where the structure and the actual valuation need to be disaggregated and then put back together. But it's important. A lot of people, there's a lot of untruths out there. I had a call from an advisor once that said, so if I value it using RR, that means I don't have to take into account the debt of the practice. I said, no, that's not right. That's not right. I said, but there's some sophisticated people who make these comments. So, it's valuation less what we call structural debt plus surplus assets is the true valuation of an entity, and just the multiple times the profit is the times the future maintainer is the value of the goodwill.
Yep. No, understood. It's always good. You don't always know these things until you go through the exercise of selling your business for the first time. And often advisors have had their business for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years and only are looking to sell it at the end. What's some of the lessons that we might have about structuring a business in general to get ready for sale? Like if I want to sell my business in 10 years' time, should I be doing things today in terms of my entity or structure to get ready for these events?
Well, you should. I mean, one of the things that's really obvious is if you fall out. So if you fall out of the small business tax exemptions, your tax rate's going to go through the roof. It'll just go right off a cliff. So you've got to be careful of the 2 million turnover and the $6 million test. So they're the two things, making sure but my view is you should be actually even 7 years out, you should, at the end of each financial year, almost write yourself a little information. This is my practice. I'm going to sell it this way. This is the structure I'm going to use. I'm going to sell the assets. I'm going to sell the company. Blah, blah, blah. And then you're prepared, because what happens is a lot of the time is that people actually make the decision to sell or to retire, whatever it is, actually quite quickly. They go, I've had enough. And then you find that they're really not prepared. They haven't done their tax calculations. They haven't worked out all these other bits and pieces. Whereas we say, why don't end of every financial year? And the other interesting thing is, in bigger practices, it's easier to do this with multiple partners. You sit down and say, look, let's value it. And, it doesn't have to be drop dead accurate. This is the thing. This is our future. If someone comes and goes in the next 12 months, it's this. This is how it's going to be done. This is the mechanism. That creates a lot of problems. The real learning, I think, Dean, is that you don't want to be doing these things in an emotive state. And that emotive state might be a divorce, or you're sick, or something like that. It's really difficult to manage people through that process with these numbers in there. And the problem you get is that people build up a belief about a valuation, which can be very, very wrong.
And especially in the divorcing scenario, because if you imagine that husband and wife, and be the husband the advisor, like you've spent your time talking about the value of your business because you're building wealth as a family together, but the moment you've got to get this valuation for the divorce thing, that reality of what the market would pay for the business at that point in time could be remarkably different from what you were telling your wife for the last 10 years, that what my business is going to be worth if all my plans to create wealth go to plan.
So, and then the other thing about matrimonial valuations, which can be very difficult, is that there's some other principles around those that are unrelated to the industry. So value in use and these other things. So what you might sell it for isn't always what it's going to come up with on a valuation. And if for example, the wife has a view of that value, it can cause a lot of tension. And but it's all about understanding education and communication early on. And then you've got the other thing that I think we're sort of dancing around a little bit here is you can get some higher prices through what we call through a sales process. So if we could get a lot of people interested in an asset, it can push the pricing up, because you've got to remember it can be strategic for some people. And then the other thing, and I'll do some work on this in a vlog, but the other thing is you can get for example, you get these structured buyouts where they buy 50 now and over the journey with earn-out clauses. So you will get higher prices on those because you can protect the value. And so, and then, in the media, that all gets hodgepodged into,
one number.
And then everyone goes, oh, they're all worth this. And I mean, I had a bit of a cathartic moment early on in my valuation career, because I was a young chartered accountant, came into the industry, and people said, these are worth, believe it, this is how old I am. This will really date me. They were worth 2 times revenue then, not 3, 2 times. Anyway, so I said, that's fine. When does anyone ever talk about profit here? Like that was my question to this guy. And a guy said, well, they're actually 5 times the EBIT, Tim, is really what they're worth. And so you can see the 2's gone to 3 over the journey, and the 5's gone to 6.
Yep. Tim, the other question that's interesting is, at the moment, you see a lot of single advisor businesses that sort of have no plan. And so what they're starting to do is find another single advisor business that they trust and sort of go, how about if we kind of put something in place to back each other up should something happen? And then the conversation extends to, well, if I die, what happens? If I became totally permanently disabled, what happens? Or, eventually I just want to retire, what happens? Can you talk us through your experience of, because like what we've sort of been suggesting to them is maybe if there's an unexpected death, that you have an agreement that it's purchased at less than probably what market value is, because you may not be expecting to buy it at that time, but it creates value for the family. Maybe there's a different valuation if it was something that was more expected. Can you talk us through, in your experience, the ways that can potentially work? And what works best?
It's a bit of a horses for courses argument, that one. I mean, my view is you to be brutally honest, you don't really want to be a sole practitioner long term. Yeah. Because I mean, I've got an unrelated. It's not a financial planning practice I'm working with, but if you go from 2 to 1, the valuation gets challenged because you haven't got enough people. But conversely, as you get more people around it, the sort of solidity of the valuation grows. So, and look, there are plenty of really good sole practitioners out there. I'm not saying it's bad to be a sole practitioner, but it has extra challenges that are bigger practice. So, no, really, what a sole practitioner, if they're good, should be bringing someone in up underneath and managing their position. So, but I have done, like I had a similar situation. I worked with a guy he was a sole practitioner, and our solution was, and he had another practice that was going to, if he died, they would back him up. In the end, we just merged him into that practice.
Yeah.
Because it's also funny that you shouldn't expect, I suppose, that if you're a sole practitioner, like a barrister, like a specialist sole practitioner, there's no equity value in that, because the value dies when the barrister dies. And so I think sometimes with these, if it's a sole practitioner and a very small number of staff around that particular person, is also I flip around and say, you don't have to expect there's a huge value from your business. Just go and get some life insurance. Like, that's actually a cheaper way than maybe merging Tim with another business.
Oh, if you're managing death, you got to be careful though. One of the things you're alluding to is this concept of commercial goodwill versus personal goodwill, and so a barrister has, in my view, personal goodwill because it's him.
Yes.
And look, to a degree, an advisor has some personal goodwill, but because of the way the fee structures work, there's an argument that there is some commercial goodwill that you can sell. But you're right, and again, the advent of the Royal Commissioner, you don't get someone in that place in 90 days, the fees go. So
nothing, right? It's just clients with no revenue and no advisor.
And we've had that chat. We've had that chat a couple of times on UncommonCents about the. I think we did it last fall, Craig, about this. The stark reality of dying and then ongoing service agreements with no advisor to service them. There's obviously an issue there that results in fees getting turned off as well, which is obviously a concern.
Yeah, so I think you've got to, and look to it. Yeah, So you've got to manage that issue. But I'm a great believer that we need to be doing more and more internal succession and less business sales.
Yeah.
Just because, and there's a bit of a myth out there that I won't get a higher price. But if you do the maths of bringing a successor through and it grows nicely because of that, they're actually about the same. And so, and you got to remember that's a lower risk transaction. So, but, and the other thing I think we need to really be aware of now is the market to purchase these practices is just significantly more sophisticated now. Like when I first came in, we do a contract, put a 3 times revenue in it, a bit of a clawback, come back 12 months later, yep, that was fine. Whereas we go through, due diligence, IMs, it all goes down to the granular level on the client base, and the people, and there's a sort of, in my mind, there's almost a theoretical cap at the, it's sort of conversely the other way. The bigger guys are actually not going to overpay.
Yeah, they'll just walk away and buy a different business.
Yeah, they'll go to that price because they know exactly where their value is and they won't go above it. And so you can see the market just disappears above that unless you get some, rogue. So it solidly hits a cap. So, and we did a couple of transactions in the last 2 years where we really saw that. And I think that's really a feature of the market. So you can get competitive tension and higher prices through, a transaction process, but the market is just so much more sophisticated now. Yep. You're going to have to really earn that.
Absolutely.
And just on the internal succession then, obviously we're seeing a lot of the younger people who are prepared and want to do it, not being able to afford to do it immediately because of cost of living's up, debt's up, interest rates are up on mortgages, private school fees, etc. The vendor financing, are you seeing that structure in those cases more, or is it like, no, I don't want that, I need you to borrow money, or a bit of both?
I think the answer is yes. I mean, there's diverging views on this. Like some people say don't do it. My sort of theory on it is if you're still in the practice with this person while this vendor finance is going on, so what? That's fine. Yeah. It's when they leave it too late and the vendor finance is hanging over the end that you get some problem. I mean, again, you got to come back actually to the mathematics of these practices. So if you got a 6 times earnings multiple, that's a 16.66% return. Now, when interest rates were 2, you could easily pay that off. Now, even at 6, so you got 6 goes to interest and 10 goes to principal reduction, but it's still going to, and you're going to say there's some tax somewhere, Tim, I know that, but I'm just taking a simple argument. So they are fundable. And then look, so I think to answer that question a different way, Craig, is people, what you need to, succession is about do the plan and then work out how to fund it second. Don't assume it can't be funded because there's debt structures you can use, there's vendor finance, there's external capital you can use. So it is, we solve that problem every day of the week. So, and look, there's some practices have done some really innovative thing. I think I spoke with a guy called David Andrew at the FPA, would have been pre-COVID. They'd had a really good crack at that with Macquarie Bank, did some sort of facilities that did the deductible and the non-deductible. So, it's a solvable problem. My experience is people say, they can't afford it, so I don't talk to them. I think that's the wrong approach.
And I can tell you from the younger advisors that I might talk to is that they're in that camp of not necessarily wanting or being able to take on the debt to buy out the business owner. The challenge is that they're fully capable of starting their business from scratch. And so that's the conundrum. If you're not engaging your younger advisors early enough, they're actually going to be looking over the fence and going, well, this thing's expensive. I'm going to have to buy it off them in the future and it's going to be more expensive. They're not talking to me about it. I could just start from scratch.
And so this is one of the challenges in succession, and we often do this, is that sometimes you have to discount early to get them in because you know, I in my own accounting practice, we lost our financial planner a month ago, and it was for a completely personal reason. He had an overseas relationship and he went there. But the point being that, you know, without him tied in to equity for the long run, I got exposed to a risk. So, you know, it's important to lock these people away. And if you have to discount the first bit, and so again, comes back to just run your numbers. So if you might discount the first 5%, but if it grows right, your actual total number is going to be at or about the same level. And you've got to remember, the minute you got those people in, your risk has dropped away. You've got an automatic market for your stuff.
Yeah.
So, and look, I've just done this whole process in my practice where some of my equity is being sold down with vendor loans, Craig. So, and you know, admittedly it's hard early, but then I've looked at it now and thought, that worked pretty well. You know,
it's these succession is a difficult conversation overall, whether it's with staff wanting to come up or business partners equally. I see so many shareholders agreements or buy-sell agreements that are in draft format, and they've been in bloody draft for 5 years because they got stuck on a couple of different issues, which in my view, sometimes it's lawyers, sometimes it's them, but they're all 1%ers. So instead of dealing with the 80% of the document that could be agreed on and then getting something in place, a couple of these 1%ers end up delaying the entire signing of the document, which is even worse.
Yeah, no, I'm guilty on that one because you does your head in a little bit. But you're right. You need to get it. And look, it's a whole thing about you know, progress, not perfection. You know, I say
you can always change it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but you know, if it's 80% right, it's sort of right. Like it's right, and so you just got to be you've got to practically move on. But I think I just want to say this thing about succession that's really important. You know, you've got an asset minimum return of 16.66%, 16.66. That'll fix most problems. Like, you know, if you actually do the mathematics, it actually works. People, and that's why I get, you know, and this is one of the arguments versus a capital investor versus debt. You know, a capital investor, you know, they're going to cost you, you know,
16.6%.
Yeah.
Debt ex tax is going to cost you a lot less than that. So now you've got some cash flow issues around that. But so, you know, an external piece of capital is probably the last piece of funding you want. And it makes sense in certain strategic places, but you know, it shouldn't be your first one. Your people, lining your equity to your people is the most successful strategy in the game. And you know, professional services firm, they grow and develop off the activities of the principals. And so if you align their profit to their outcome, it'll go well.
Yep, absolutely. So you touched on one thing that we wanted to talk a little bit about, Tim, about the structuring of businesses and debt. So
yes, that's right.
This is a really interesting insight that we've had. We were chatting about it last week about how debt has to be repaid. We all know that. And sometimes in our businesses, we've acquired debt and then we've had 3 years or 6 years or 9 years interest only. And lo and behold, the bank wants us to start to repay the principal. And so talk to us about the differences in essentially that my business is in a trust versus my business is in a company when we have debt that needs to be repaid.
So there's actually, I'll make one other comment on debt before we go there. So debt is a legitimate tool for succession too. And so one of the things that people forget about is you can actually gear some of these entities up a bit to get some of the capital out to make the buy-in price for the next generation, you know, more palatable. And I can see Jamie Melville from Macquarie just frothing at the mouth when I say this because we have a different view on this argument. But my difference with Jamie is that, you know, you can have some interest-only periods to build up buffers. He says you've got to be careful they spend on lifestyle. That's fine. But so that's the first thing. Don't forget about using internal debt rather than external debt, security against business. But your point is, if you've got a loan with large capital repayments, you need to carry that debt in a corporate structure, because the principal repayments will be made at 20, in 25 cents in the dollar is all you have to pay on the profit before you pay the debt down. If it goes out to an end shareholder through a trust, it's likely going to be double that cost. So I think when we did our practice, I remember having a Barney with the existing bank at the time, who will remain nameless, who wouldn't give us some structural stuff we wanted to do. I worked out the extra tax we would pay would have been sort of in the vicinity of $300,000 to $400,000 because of the structure. And I said, so debt goes in a corporate structure, and then you can pay it down. People, the only real downside of that is that you will develop a large pool of franking credits in that company that will be difficult to get to.
Yep.
But it's half the tax rate. And at the end of the day, you've got to be careful, because some of the arguments for putting them in these trusts, the client bases and stuff, is capital gains tax. I can get a better. The only thing the company can't get is what's called the general discount. So it can still get the active asset, it can still get the retirement exemption, still get the 15-year rule. So understanding where that fits in as well is quite important. And then the other thing too, and at the end of the day, even if you pay the corporate tax rate, you get a franking credit.
Yeah.
And so, Craig, that's the other thing about corporate versus non-corporate structure. When you pay tax outside that structure, it's gone. It's gone. You're never going to get it back. It's paid and gone. Whereas it's in a corporate structure, you've got a franking credit that could possibly be redeemed through a financial planning strategy down the track. So, and look, the other thing about it is too, mostly, the point about companies and tax is companies are a parking point and allow you to park profits at a particular tax rate and then do something with them. And so even if you don't have debt, it's still a better structure, in my view, to use a company.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the big lesson and insight that I had is that if you just think about that, you've got to repay $100,000 in debt.
Yep.
In a company, you only need $125,000 worth of profit to repay $100,000 in debt.
Yep.
If your same structure is in a trust, you're probably having to pay up to maybe the 40 or 45% tax rate because you've drawn a salary already. So unless you've got 1,000 children that are all 19 years old, the reality is you're paying the 45% tax bracket to repay that $100,000 of debt. And corporate beneficiaries don't help that scenario because the money's got to get back into the company.
So the bucket company strategy doesn't work because you can't transfer the cash. And so you're absolutely right. And so I think understanding your structure, and the biggest problem is people tend not to structures start because I'm small and I didn't need it, and that's common with accountants. Like I'm guilty of this. That plumber just started as he didn't need a company, and then 3 or 4 years later he does because he's grown. So, and the other thing about it too is though, somewhere down the track you're going to grow to a point where you need to do some form of succession planning.
Yep.
So you've got a company, you've got what I call a unitized structure that can bring people in and out, whereas like a discretionary,
you can't do it in a discretionary trust. Yeah,
it's a nightmare. Because all you can do is have a partnership with the trust, and it's just, I glaze over at that point.
It's messy when we know a company is very it's pretty obvious from ASIC's perspective who owns the shares and what the shares are able to do and the control as well. So
I mean, I did a seminar on capital gains tax, and this guru really he was right. He said if you want to peel a structure apart, the two partnerships of the discretionary trust actually is the better structure because you can, if you want to separate down the track. But the whole point is you don't. We want to build profitable businesses, which means we need more people within our business, a planned succession around staffing and bringing those staff in as owners to grow a practice that's going to be around for another 10 or 20 years. Yeah, so that's really really important to do and think through early on, because it'll save you a lot of. I mean, the hardest thing is like if you get into a transaction and you're actually dealing with tax issues halfway through the transaction, that's a disaster because that means you have to go back and renegotiate with the person purchasing. Say, could you do this? And what you really should be doing, and what we push our people to, when you do an IM to sell a business, we say the structure of the transactions we're doing is this: we want you to buy the shares of this company, or we want you to buy this client base out of this company. That's the structure.
Yeah.
Because we already know. Because
you've already thought about it. Yeah.
Well, the issue is if you get halfway down, you want to change the structure of the transaction, your negotiating position is diminished.
Yeah.
And
I want a discount. I'm paying a discount now, Tim, if you want to renegotiate.
And look, the other thing is, this is a true story. We did one, and we were 90 days off getting the 15-year rule.
Right.
And so, and I did the numbers with this guy. I said, look, we just got to string it out. The difference in the value to you is just massive. But that was good. We went back and the purchaser was happy to do it after the 1st of January, I think it was. So
but that's the same with all the small business concessions, Tim. Like you can sell something for, if you come under the 6 mil, selling it for less, you'll end up with more after tax than selling it for 6 million and one and not getting the small business concessions.
Yeah, so that's why I said your tax rate falls off a cliff. And that's why understanding that, and the other horror story I had was like I had a guy going through them, and I can't remember how this, but anyway, he sold his house and put the cash in the bank, and he was renting for a while. But of course, that meant he breached the 6 million rule because the house doesn't go into the 6 million rule, but the cash does. Yeah. So this is and you've got to be so careful of these things and have some leeway. So it's really. But my point is, know what it is, and then then you've got an ability to get through the transaction the right way. If you've got to do it later, and this isn't a financial planning event, but I had a friend of mine who's a partner in another accounting firm, and they had a distribution to a trust 2 years ago that no one remembered about, and the whole calculation blew up because it breached this and it breached that in the law. And so that's why we've got to be very careful with these things. It's similar in a funny way. It's similar to, I had this circumstance the other day. If you even $1 over your non-concessional cap triggers a problem. So
yes.
So you just have to be careful that you know everything and where everything is.
Yeah. Don't get ready. And that's the whole element of getting ready for sale and planning in advance. If you knew you're going to sell and you upgraded your house or put more money into super so that then you're below the cap, like that's planning. As an advisor and a business owner, that's planning our own stuff, but we've got to work with our accounting partners to make sure we, are aware of these type of things as well.
Yeah. If I had it my way, every practice would have a valuation at the 30th of June and a documented sales strategy or succession strategy with an IM. And if something happens during the year, just pull it out. There you go. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, the other thing is people are unaware when an offer is going to come along. This is the other, I wasn't going to sell this, Tim, but this bloke's come and said this. I said, well, where you at with that? And whereas you can be much better prepared if you do that.
Yeah.
So, and it's inevitable one of those, you're either going to sell it or do a succession plan.
Well, correct. Or you're going to end up buying something because something comes along that you want to buy. So, which is succession anyway. So there's plenty of different options. So that's been great, Tim. Good conversation. Craig, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
Sorry, Craig, you did have one question on normalisation. Did you want me to just do 30 seconds on that?
Yeah, we can perhaps do on that, like normalisation from a perspective of, normalising a director's salary or those kind of things. We had some debate recently in terms of would that director's salary be different based on the state that you sit in or not? And that type of stuff. So just interested in your view on that.
Yeah. So the principal normalisation we do now post Royal Commission is market salaries for principal advisors.
Yep.
We try to go to third party like a Hayes or something like that. The major difference, though, if I was brutally honest, is regional versus capital city, is where we see them. Like, you don't tend to put a capital city value salary on a regional area. There are nuances. Sydney's normally higher than Melbourne, but not by a lot anymore. So, but the major normalisation is salaries, because you've got to remember most other costs and most other things in a financial planning practice. Sorry, bar maybe you own your building, you might be being a bit cute with your rent. Are pretty standard. So we don't see lots of normal. So there isn't a lot of normalisation goes on really compared to years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, that's probably a great way to finish. I think the one thing to learn from this whole conversation, Dean and Tim, is that when you're at this point, you need to seek professional advice, because there's lots of moving parts that could have either positive or negative implications to this. But I actually love your comment, Tim. Everyone on the 30th of June should have a valuation, and everyone should have an IM ready to go, because you just never, ever know.
Yeah. So there is just one other quick closing comment that I think is important is you shouldn't really do succession and or sale of your business on your own. And the reason I say that is, one, you need the technical ability that we have. But at the end of the day, it's selling your business or it's an emotional thing. It's your business and it's your baby. And you sometimes need someone like Tim Lane, for example, to say, you've got to settle down on this one.
Yeah.
Because that comment he made wasn't actually a negative comment. It was just a comment. And so, I've seen people without advisors blow these things up on things that an advisor would have stopped them doing. So, don't do the journey on your own. Do it with somebody.
And one of the common ones there, Dean, we're going to 45 minutes because it's a great chat. But
rock on, Craig.
One of the common ones there, Tim, is like, I don't want my business name to change. I've seen so many sellers go, I'm willing to sell my business, but you can't change my business name. And months and months and months go on, and then they end up selling it for less, and the name changes anyway.
Or they get wound up on, some compliance issues or stuff like that, and you go, look, because at the end of the day, there's no riskless transaction for a buyer or a seller, and so you're like wound up on, you've said the wrong thing about my business, which is just a comment. It's not really a derogatory comment. Yeah. You're right, brand. And the other thing is, I've got a bit of a brutal saying. What's the relevance of your view of your business? Absolutely zero. Nothing. It's got no relevance at all what you think it's worth. The market, and I've got another saying. I said, we don't educate vendors. The market educates the vendor. So they'll get the offers that are there, and that's the market. We can do certain things around that, but that's the market talking. If it doesn't like that, you can talk it up all you like, but that's the market.
Okay, Dean, you can wrap it up.
All right.
Good.
That was great, Tim. Very good conversation. We've got a lot to learn, all advisors and practice owners, about what it looks like to get ready for sale. We've done themes of planned and unplanned succession. We've done themes of what the valuation is and why that matters, and how to fund. Sorry,
just one more thing. So if you look at our website, we have a process, we call it triage. If you've got a valuation or succession, you can ring us and just book it. A 15-minute conversation. It doesn't cost anything. It's just an education piece. So if you need help, reach out. Sorry.
Good. Thanks, Tim. We'll put your website in the chat and the LinkedIn. Really appreciate that. That would be good for people to go through this process. So thanks very much, Tim. Thanks, Craig. Great questions. And we'll see you all next fortnight for the next episode of Uncommon Sense. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.